morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition, streamed live all over the world in the United States of America. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in Research Triangle Park in the great state of North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States of America. On this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, a recession, rising gas prices, inflation, and an increasingly divisive and turbulent world, politically, economically. Today, I want to open up my monologue to talk about share with you some insights from an op-ed I wrote in WRL TechWire. And then we're going to dive into the international affairs of the day, talking about the railroad strike, talking about Ukraine, Russia, talking about the student loan freezes and all of those different things going on in the Biden administration. And of course, the aftermath of the political election a few weeks ago in the midterms and 2024. But before I begin, I wanted to talk today about something that we've been observing in the tech industry, a tech industry in crisis. Facebook, Meta currently reduced its workforce by 13%, and Elon Musk, as the new chief executive of Twitter, has laid off almost 2/3 of its workforce, but 80% of its contract workers. About 73,000 tech workers as of now have lost their jobs in the United States. But if you're one of the immigrants who make up 20 to 30% of the workers at these companies, the situation is looking quite dire for you. Many of you have H-1B or skill visas. But now that you lost your job, and I know many of them are, actually I know a few here in North Carolina lost their jobs, including hundreds at Meta and Twitter, they will only have 60 days to find a new job. And if they are unable to, they will have to leave the country. Now, we've spoken about this issue time and time again, about our high-skill visa system. We will be bringing on guests next week to wrap up the year talking about immigration reform, including Jeremy Robbins and others. But the bottom line is immigrants must compete for an artificially constrained number of H-1B skill visas. And workers who win the lottery are anchored to be specific companies that hired them. And they can only change employers, but they can do it with great difficulty. And from high population countries like India and China, they're forced to wait decades, sometimes a decade and a half, to get their H-1B and their green card. Now, some critics who have argued with me on radio and TV here in North Carolina have said that tech companies just can't support these workers right now. So let's just cut them loose, or let's hire local while we're bringing in foreigners to fill these jobs. But I believe that's incredibly short-sighted. It ignores the major investment our country's already made in these workers. They're trained at first-rate colleges and universities. They went on to hone their skills at American startups and our high-tech market-leading companies here in the United States of America. And we want them to start their companies here, not go to other countries, which, by the way, they're going to Canada in droves. And not every tech market is shrinking. Right here in North Carolina, we've seen plenty of layoffs where Mark Lee and I sit and Nick Plaudiva, but we've also seen these offset by great job announcements from Apple to Fujifilm to Fidelity to Microsoft. All of these companies hiring, local employers are eager to hire these foreign-born workers. And let's not forget the labor crisis. It's hard to find talent. For every technology job open, for every technology job, there's 8 openings. It's critically important. The final thing I'll say before I end this monologue is the fact that, 25 to 30% of these workforces are with immigrant workers. And so I do think that there is a connection between immigration and innovation. And I think that it's a hard issue because we also have the issue between dreamers that are documented and undocumented dreamers. We have illegal immigration. It's a very complex issue. But that's my take of the day about skilled immigration amidst the layoffs and why I think it's critically important that we relook our policies and encourage the Congress before they close out the session to pass the DREAM Act and allow these skilled immigrants to stay in the United States of America. We want those jobs here. Now let's get started and get into the other issues of the day. Today we have with us Mark Lee, the co-producer of the show.
Glad to be here with you. Getting ready to bring in some of the other folks, including Shaquille, as well as Dan Worthington, and of course, Lee Newton Rhodes as well. And who knows, maybe Nick Palveda will join us at some time as well. It's fascinating.
And before we get into my monologue, we're just going to talk about what I said for a few minutes, but just a couple of things we're going to talk about today. First of all, gas prices could drop below $3 a gallon by Christmas. Found that to be interesting. Yesterday's ruling in appeals court kept the student loan forgiveness program on pause by an appeals court, which would forgive up to $20,000 in federal student loans for millions of people. And Congress is moving to head off a potentially devastating railroad strike. The House sent 2 bills to the Senate yesterday, one that would force a controversial deal with freight companies and another that included paid sick days. The Senate's timing is less predictable, but we know they're working through these matters. But we're going to, and then we'll, of course, hopefully Sasha will join.
Hey, Steve, I got a question that actually alludes to our conversation yesterday, and it actually alludes to your monologue and everything in that nature. But yes, there is a push to have the immigrants that are in that field stay in that field and stay here and all in that regards. And I definitely respect that and everything. But, we were having this whole conversation around rice or race or whatever you want to call it, as Chris Greco likes to jokingly call it. And there are programs that have been also pushing to make sure that the minority community is involved as well. For example, I think there's a thing called Black Girls Code, which is trying to make sure that African-American women are learning about computer coding. And then there are some other programs that are minority oriented. I think Renee Daughtry has one that has all kinds of students that are learning about the coding field and about tech and all in that space. So I was just wondering, I would love to hear from Shaquille and the others if those are programs that we should be supporting, because as you said, the title is called Black Girls Code. So of course they're trying to get more Black women into coding and all in that space. So is that problematic, Shaquille, or not problematic? Because there is a shortage of Black women in the
country. But there's only 3% of Black Americans in tech. So we should just encourage more minority representation. I know what Shaquille's going to say, but I think that Indians represent 30% of our tech workforce is from India.
Simple
right now.
Get the training, apply for the jobs. I mean, if they wanted to be in tech, they'd be in tech, right? It's get the training, apply for the jobs. That way you get your numbers up.
But Dan, that's what I just said. The program is training Black women into coding.
They certainly find a way to have over 30% of the federal government jobs. So, which overrepresents the population. So,
Dan?
Because they're interested in government jobs, right? So if they're interested in coding, that's good. You have training programs. I like that because everyone who wants to get in tech should be able to get in tech. And what
Dan, are you saying there's personal responsibility?
Yeah, God,
Where do you get this from?
It's just freaking common sense. My God, we make everything about race baiting and race things and this and that. The answer, okay, so Mark, what I believe is there has been an unfair culture of poverty in the United States that's affected the Black population, but it's also affected poor white people. We talked about the trader trash issue yesterday, and the fact that I grew up and was raised in the trader. I guess I'm trader trash. Somehow I made it. I don't know. I got 2 doctorate degrees. But anyway, God bless America, right? We got opportunity here. But no one handed me anything. I had to go to school and earn it just like everybody else. And so if people so the Asians don't seem to have a problem learning tech and getting the tech jobs, right? I mean, I'm being overly, categorizing, but as a people, they tend to do better in the technical areas, right? As a group, and so if Black folks want to have tech jobs, great, get the training, apply for the jobs. As far as I'm concerned, if I were an employer, I wouldn't care what color you were as long as you had the skills. I'm not going to hire quotas. Do I think diversity helps an organization?
Dan?
Well, it could. I don't know.
Dan?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. In America, is anyone stopping anyone from learning any trade or craft?
No, that's my point.
What's the issue?
We need to get more. We need to educate all communities more about the opportunities in the technology, and perhaps
you don't think they know, Steve?
That's true, but
they don't
read.
They don't hear.
They don't market it enough. I mean, the problem is
And that cuts across everybody. Right now, the young people, a lot of the young people are just freaking lazy. They don't want to work. They want to check out. They want to.
Dan, that's not restricted to young people.
Oh, it's everybody.
Yeah.
It's personal responsibility. It's
Hey,
one
wait
of
a
the
minute,
biggest.
we've got the boss here as well.
On the freaking media, right? It's the quiet quitting. It's the inability to take responsibility. Let me tell you something.
I hope you Republicans get a heart for
Of course,
Christmas.
to have freedom and liberty, there has to be a connection
Very
between
cute.
rights and responsibility. People have to take responsibility for their own lives. No one else is going to do it, right? I mean, there's no one behind me protecting me from the consequences of my bad choices or the blessings of my good choices. That's
Dan?
how it works.
I think I've bit my tongue for long enough, so I'll
Yeah,
I'll,
so
Here comes the tongue lashing.
I'll respond here.
Okay.
Yes, Republicans
Right.
need to get a heart and discriminate against the majority of people because of their skin color. That's exactly what they need to do for Christmas. Let me just say this.
Brandon Hart.
It's going to
You're
sound
about
like
to be
I'm
elected president
going
when
back
I vote.
on the very hard, bullheaded way that I took on Barkley on yesterday's show for almost 2 hours and an hour and a half backstage afterwards. Let me just say this. It is very clear if you look at relatively recent US history, 20 years ago, that there were still issues with specifically, I'm not going to say all minority communities. I don't think there's such a thing as the minority communities all being one community. That just, to me, that's not true. But I'm going to be very specific about the African American community because their experiences in the United States is different to even other immigrant communities that have come in, including Africans that have moved from Africa into the United States. Their experience is going to be different from the people that have lived there for generations. I've had to go through things like the Jim Crow laws and, prior to that, slavery itself and the civil rights movements, that sort of thing. And certainly we know that there has been lots of groups, like, for example, police services, that were an all-white men club, which, wouldn't allow blacks to come in very easily and certainly wouldn't allow black women to come in very easily. And there was an uphill battle for those people to play in. I have no problems with affirmative action and those types of things being used temporarily in order to correct something. What I do have a problem with is when you guys look at numbers and you say, well, look, there's 13% of the population that is made up of this group of people, but this particular industry only has 3 or 4% representation. So therefore, there must be some sort of racial bias going on. The reality is that if you take any group of people and separate them from the rest of the community, whether that could be on eye color, it could be on whereabouts in Europe 10 generations away, 10 generations ago they came from. Whatever it is that you do, you are going to find disparities. You are going to find places where they are overrepresented. You are going to find places where they are underrepresented. So whenever you find a place where they're underrepresented, you point to that and say, well, look, that proves that racism still exists today. And so to remedy that issue, we're going to have this program. And the way it's worded, it's difficult to argue against. Why would anybody oppose a program that's designed to help young black girls get coding skills so they can enter the industry?
Sure.
I don't oppose that in and of itself. But what I oppose is if government funds are being used to do it, and I'm not talking about America because I'm not American, but this is a general thing. If government funds are being used to do it, a similar financial help being given to poor white kids or to people of the Latin community or whatever, right? We can name all sorts of different communities. And if it's not, that's an unfair thing. And let me just remind you that we've gone well past the point where it's clear disparities, where it's really obvious, and things have been like that for decades and they've needed to change. Let me just finish this one thing. We've gone past that, and now we talk about things like microaggressions, about privilege, about unintentional racism, that sort of stuff. So what you do when you do that is you create a situation where people are just constantly bombarded with, I've got to go to sensitivity training, I've got to learn all this other stuff because I might look at somebody the wrong way. and therefore
Well, I mean,
that's going to make
but,
me a racist.
but,
And
but I think,
that's not on.
but there is.
Steve,
I'll give you
let's go.
a
Steve,
story of.
leave us go
Let me
next.
share.
and I talk over him.
Let me
Leave-
share
leave-
you.
Steve, real
Let me
quickly,
share you. But let me share you a personal story about racial bias. It's a true
and
story.
then I'll come after you, Steve.
Let
Okay,
Lee just
go
say
ahead,
something.
Lee, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, what people are forgetting is people make personal choices. People choose to go into fields or not to go into fields. Steve, you're not a surgeon because you chose not to be. People choose not to be athletes. They don't want to get up at 5 a.m., run in the park. People choose not to do coding. People choose not to whatever. That doesn't mean there's bias against it.
But
And
Lee,
Steve,
I see what you're saying.
I know you want to share.
Let me
Steve, I know
retort-
you want to share a story of your own
Yeah.
personal experience, but let me just
Yeah,
say
so-
this: we all have personal experiences with this. But if you are going to look at particular industries and say that there's a lower percentage of people in that particular industry, therefore that proves racism, the only solution to that would be to force exactly proportionate representation in every industry at all times. And to do that, you would have to say to some black girls, I'm sorry, sweetheart, you can't go and be a pilot. You can't go into whatever field you want to go into. You must go into computer coding. That's the only way you would achieve that. Why would you want to do that to people?
But I'll give you a story about where bias exists, and I think anyone who says it doesn't exist is fooling themselves. So on Veterans Day, my mother-in-law, who's a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, immigrant from India, her husband died 4 years ago. My children's grandparents. She went with the family to a breakfast. I wasn't able to make it for veterans, and I was speaking at the town event. And when she got on the table for the veterans, a white man who was in the military said, "Ma'am, you have to step down from the stage because this is for veterans for the United States Air Force, not the Indian Air Force." He refused to apologize. He refused to apologize, and she pulled out her rank, and she actually outranked him. And then she walked out of the restaurant, and it ruined the entire day for the grandchildren and for my family. But for people to say that bias doesn't exist,
Of course
and
it
the
does,
fact
Steve.
that man wouldn't even apologize
But
to my
Steve,
mother.
Steve, and bias exists. Hold on a second. Steve, bias
But
exists
don't
across
tell me
the board.
that
Even
that's
exists
bias.
among
That's
different
bias.
minority groups
Steve,
as well.
hang on a
Because
second.
I've got a
Hang on.
story in that same space,
Let
and
me
it actually comes to
let me
something.
respond to Steve because I'm Indian like Steve is. Let me just respond to that for a minute. Okay.
How could you not? How could you not, as a veteran? That's inexcusable.
You're right.
The man should
Duh.
have. If what
Wouldn't
you're
even
saying,
apologize. Wouldn't even apologize. And
Steve,
said,
he's
you
a
know what?
pig.
if things happened the way that you've said, that man
Right.
was well out of order. But that is not a reflection of the entirety of the United States. This
Yeah,
is
of course.
akin to. Hang on a second. This is akin to people who want to get offended on my behalf when I'm in the United States. I get to America and people are not expecting me to have an Australian accent. Now, I personally don't think my Australian accent's that strong, but everyone else says it is. So, okay,
I never
take everyone
noticed.
else's opinion on that. All right. But when I get to America and I start speaking, people normally take a double take and go, "Oh, where's this guy from?" Is that because they're being racist? Is that because they're being
But
biased?
they're not racist, but they have bias. They're not racist.
Or not,
They're
or
not
assume
racist.
they have a different accent.
No, it comes down
What's the
Shaquille
big
and
deal?
Steve. It comes down to bias, and that's the story that I was going to use. I think I've used it
That's
before and everything.
cool.
And sometimes it can exist even to what Lee was saying about personal choice, because a lot of times we don't take into consideration what people's knowledge base is as well. I think I've told this story before,
Or
but I'm going to tell
talents
it
or
once again
desires.
because I have a friend that was going with a group of friends. They were all different ethnicities and everything, and they went to a certain Asian restaurant, and they basically were insulted at the Asian restaurant because they were called the equivalent of the N word and everything. But what they did not realize was, I told you, it was a mixed crowd. That a good friend of mine recognized what was going on and spoke Mandarin, so she knew what they were saying, and she pulled the whole crowd together and was like, "Look, we got to leave this restaurant because these folks have no respect for us and everything," which is kind of the bias example that you're talking about, because it comes down to having knowledge and being able to maneuver what was going on. And by the way, the woman was a white woman that understood Mandarin, so she was like, "No," and it was a mixed crowd. She's like, "We're not going to have service at this particular restaurant because I know what they just said, and they called you basically the N-word."
I want to come back to Steve, right? Steve, you've named one example of where something has happened, and I'm sorry that your father passed away, but you've use one example. But how many more examples are there every day
But
where
that's the
things didn't happen that
Yes.
where America wasn't biased towards it? And the thing is, you're not going to talk about those, right?
No,
nobody's going to come on here other than me. Nobody comes on here and says, "Guess what? I went to a particular place, and guess what? Nothing happened. I was
But I
treated
think,
really
but here's what I'm
America
trying to say.
really went to me."
What are the odds?
Bias exists both ways. A lot of times, the problems we might, and I want to get off this topic because this is not a show about race. We have to talk about other issues. But the bottom line is, we there may be bias the other way. Just because Dan Worthington and Nick are white or Lee, I can't assume that they agree with those views. I can't have bias saying, well, Dan Worthington is a racist. I mean, we have different opinions, but I know that Dan Worthington is not a racist. So the point I'm trying to make is the bias oftentimes on both sides. People, how many times have I heard people say, well, I don't want to go into that into a poor black neighborhood, right? Or that black man's wearing a hoodie, he might be a crook, or but things are said often about white people.
Hang on a second, Steve, because let's be serious here for a minute, okay? I drive a Bentley Continental GT convertible. Thanks, Nick. All of our audience knows that. I was never going to say that on air, right? But he decided to blurt it out one day.
Hey,
If
Bentley's
I
a good
happen
car.
to have the car, if I just happen to have
money.
that exact vehicle in the United States, do you think I would want to drive through a ghetto? Do you think I would want to drive through a poor area, regardless of the skin color of the people that live there? Why would I drive a super expensive car like that and dangle it in front of people that are struggling to survive? What possible reason would I do that unless I've got a death wish? I'm inviting trouble if I was to do that.
No,
right?
Shaquille, you're making a.
Hang on. This idea about there's bias existing in the world. Of course there is. What do you want to do? You've already got everybody in schools, from schools to universities to government jobs to the media, talking about sensitivity and bias and all that sort of stuff, putting everyone through sensitivity training all the time. Okay. There's going to be bias. There just is. That's just how it's going to be.
But Shaquille, along those same lines, and I said I was going to bring this up earlier and everything, so I'm going to bring it up now. And it's kind of a pivot conversation, but not totally, and all in that space. One of the conversations that happens, and it's not all communities, I don't care whether it's African American, Latin American, all the communities and everything, is that if you have made it to a certain level of affluence, are you responsible, coming back to personal responsibility that Lee was bringing up and everything, are you responsible to try to help those people from your community to have a come up with you and everything? Because that's a conversation that has been brought to like people like Michael Jordan. I don't know Michael Jordan personally, but I know that that's a conversation that has been brought to his attention. Oprah and others. But I was wondering your thoughts around that, Shaquille.
I'll answer that question very briefly because I know Steve wants to get on to another subject. Okay. If you're asking me directly, firstly, morally, you might be able to make that argument. I think there's any legal compunction to do that. But if you're asking me the question morally, I can't help somebody. I just can't help somebody who's from Mumbai or Bombay or, from Pakistan or something. I can't help them. Okay, my family might be 10 generations ago from there. I don't know. I don't understand the culture. I don't really get it. Okay, I'm not going to be able to help them. Nor do I feel obligated to. If I was to meet somebody who came from Australia or New Zealand, who are people that I, understand because I've grown up in these countries, of course I would try to help them. Of course I would try to support them. Of course I'm going to go and support the actors and musicians that are Australian that have made it big in Hollywood. Of course I am. Okay. And I'm not going to deliberately, not support actors and things that don't come from that community. But, of course that's just a natural thing that you do. But the idea that you would try to ask government, if I was let's just see how absurd this would be. If I was a white Australian and I came to the United States and I said, look, there are a whole heap of white Australians that haven't made it into Hollywood. There's only been a handful that ever have. So I would like there to be a taxpayer-funded program to help white Australians get into Hollywood. I'd be laughed out of the room. I'd be laughed out of the country if I said that. But if I was to turn around and say, look, my family come from Fiji and from India, so I would like there to be a taxpayer-funded program to help these minority communities of color in the South Pacific make it into Hollywood. I'd have money thrown at me. Big tech would throw money on me. I'd have interviews on CNN. I'd be a superstar for wanting to do that. That's the shame of it. You think that when you ask me the question, do I have a moral obligation to my community? You think that my community is Fijian Indians and Indians. They're not. I have nothing in common with them other than my skin color. That's it.
You said that I did this yesterday. You kind of diverted the conversation. Where I was going was I was asking specifically because with the conversation with Michael and even Oprah is you made it from the hood. Do you have a responsibility to come back and try to get other people like you or that are from your community in order to get them to raise up? That is actually one of the compliments that people get to the Indian community. They say that the Indians go back and that they actually reach back and bring more Indians into positions of power with them. And that's what I was asking, is that more responsibility? I have my opinion, but I'd like to hear y'all's opinions.
I'm sorry, but that's exactly what I responded to. You are saying your community as if somehow the Fijian Indian community is my community. They're not. Although my mother immigrated from there, I was born in Australia. And I grew up the only person in my entire area, the only people when I was growing up that had the same ethnicity as my mother were people that were related to us. I didn't know anybody else. So what community am I supposed to have some great affinity to? I have a far stronger affinity to the general people of Australia than I do to the people of Fiji. Even when I go to Fiji, Fijians and Fijian Indians who live in Fiji, they know that I share the same ethnicity. They know that I'm Fijian Indian by blood, but they know I'm an outsider. So what community are you referring to? I got the outsider
conversation, but Dan, that's not where, Shaquille, that's not what's going. Maybe Dan can answer, or maybe Lee can answer. What I'm asking
it's easier for those basketball stars that you're talking about to go and support their communities, as you're trying to call it, because they can go back to whatever neighborhood they grew up in, and they can look around and see people that look like them, all right? They can see poor black families and say, I'm going to go and help you. I can't do that because I don't have a community like that to go back to. So what am I supposed to do? And because of that, I get told that I'm acting too white. That's the greatest offense of it. But we won't go back into last.
I'll get the violins out. Play for
No, Nick. I don't need violins. What I have asked for throughout all of my life is don't treat me any worse, but you don't need to treat me any better than anyone else. Just treat me the same, and I'll be okay.
Right. Well, we're talking about the HB1 visas in tech. I think what happens, you should add.
Let's get back to that before we go to the other issue. We totally lost focus for 30 minutes on race.
I mean, hey, Steve, you got to add trades as well. In other words, being trained in trades. And here's the reason why. Okay, let's look at Twitter. You know, we hear Twitter all the time. They only employ 7,500 people. And after the purge, it may be 3,000 or 900. So for somebody who says, hey, I'm going to get a great job in tech, they're totally delusional, because what happens, it really doesn't employ that many people. Then you look at and you have to compete internationally for the jobs. They got to compete against people in China and India and everywhere else in the world. So the tech world may not be the place to go. Now look at the trades, and I'm talking about plumbing, electricity, construction, all this stuff. Those jobs aren't leaving the United States of America because you need people here to do that work. And we don't train enough people for these particular trades. And today they're good paying jobs. And so the thing is, we need to look at tech and trades. Do not forget the trades, because those tech jobs are like, when I went to law school, I don't know about Dan, they dangled all these, the attorneys graduate, they're going to make $150,000, $200,000. No. That was a complete lie that the law schools dangled these little carrots in front of people. What really happened was you had to go to the right law school, graduate in the top of your class, and be selected because of your right antecedents. It's all written on books. And then you get that job. Okay. Now, what do I mean by antecedents? My dad owned Leonard Court. The guy I went to school with, he got a great job. His dad owned Leonard Court. Okay, his dad was Stuart Miller. His name was Leonard Miller. He was seated. He was seated already into a great job because his parents were extremely wealthy. That's when I found out when I went to school with billionaires. Okay, so the thing is, here's the deal. They don't tell you this in law school, and they don't tell you this in engineering school. Yeah, if you go to MIT, you go to Georgia Tech, you get those big jobs. But the other people,
that is absolutely absurd. If I have a child, okay, and my child wants to learn about, radio disc jockeying and media stuff, right? I'd ring Mark and say, hey, Mark, would you mind spending a little bit of time with my 15-year-old kid, show him the ropes? Because I don't have a clue. Now, I don't have any real contacts in that industry. Mark could do that, not because I'm some rich guy, some billionaire who has a big name. Nobody knows who I am in the world. I'm nobody. That's who I am. I'm nobody, right? I'm not anywhere as rich as you guys trying to make out me to be. So what's Mark going to do? He's going to do it because he knows me. He's not going to do it because, but that's just how the world works. What do you want?
Shaquille, you just made a comment that the parents give a damn about their child's education in future.
Well, I would if it was my child.
And a lot of parents do, but there are a lot of parents that don't. They say, it's not our responsibility.
The ones
the
that
government
don't
and schools
fail their kids. I mean, the
thing
thing is,
they fail their kids.
That's right. But
and we don't talk enough about that.
How do you solve that issue? Not every issue is for the government to resolve. Now, I want to address directly what you said, Steve, if you think we went off the track with the H-1B visas. Look, it is, I think, really sad if anybody has moved to the United States on a skilled visa and then they've lost their job, and now after having made what's a big move to another country, they're now in a position where they're fearful they might have to leave. That's really sad. But you know what? You're heading into more than likely heading into a downturn in the US market, okay? And it could be a very severe recession potentially. This is something that's going to face the entire world. This was something that top economists around the world were warning about during the COVID years, that trying to spend your way out of COVID would only be a temporary fix and would result in much worse outcomes a couple of years down the track. Now we are a couple of years down the track. We're 2 years roughly from when the worst of COVID was occurring. And what are we seeing? We're seeing the Fed increasing interest rates. I've said before on this show, David M. Walker has said on Economics Mondays, that unfortunately, what the Fed is going to do is they are going to try and crush demand, because they can't do anything in order to flood the market with supply. So they're going to crush demand. Crushing demand means that people are going to lose their jobs. Crushing demand means that there's going to be less production, and real estate prices potentially will fall. People will have less money to go and do things. But what do you want the country to do? What exactly should the US taxpayer, those people who still do have a job, what should they do? They're going to be asked to shoulder the burden of the people who can't find jobs through probably no fault of their own, just unlucky bad circumstances. And on the other hand, they're also going to be asked to shoulder the burden of the people who have immigrated to the United States illegally or undocumented, plus shoulder the burden of the people that came there for skilled immigration. Skilled immigration means that you've come over and the country needs you. Well, the country doesn't need you anymore because there's been a market turn. Now, I know you guys like to talk about Twitter, for example, and you use that because Elon Musk has taken over. Twitter's not the only tech company that's laid off significant numbers of their workforce. Google's parent company, Alphabet, has laid off significant numbers of their workforce.
Those tech workers are going to go work somewhere else. Those tech workers are going to support our innovation ecosystem. And we've already made investments.
American children born in America? Don't you think they're also going to?
You can have both. There's enough jobs out there, I think.
But
being laid off.
Steve, you've just belied your previous statement. You said that these people are at real risk of being deported because they won't be able to find jobs within 60 days. Now you say there's enough jobs. If there is enough jobs for them, then there's no problem. If there isn't enough jobs for them, then what are we going to do about? That's the question.
Most of them are from India. They make up today in North Carolina 30% of our technology workforce. If a lot of those people lose the jobs, there's not enough people. There's not enough white Americans or any Americans to do the jobs. That's the problem. We don't have the skill.
So why are they losing their jobs if the demand is there?
Because they don't have the training, Lee. I mean, that's the problem. In North Carolina today, the data I'm reading you is from our commerce site. 30% of our tech jobs in North Carolina are from H-1B immigrants.
But Steve,
I mean,
hold on a second. Steve, hold on a second.
That is going to be one of the worst things that you could possibly say about the United States. If what the United States is saying is you have put the parents of America through Common Core, through transgender education, telling them that maths is racist. You've done all of that, telling them that that was not going to result in their kids not being ready for the jobs in the future.
No, we got to
And
do
now,
it.
and now all of a sudden, to use your exact words, there's not enough white people in America to fill these jobs. So you've got to import the best and brightest out of an emerging country, a country that's trying to pull itself up from its bootstraps. Your country is now going to go in there
No,
and
what I'm
take
saying
the
is
best
we
and
need-
brightest
we
from
need to
there
invest
and
more
bring them into your own
education
country.
training.
That's a
We need to
terrible.
No,
we had
one
more
second. But I've got a
people
question for
trained.
Steve
We
and
had
you,
more people
Shaquille, and
trained
it
in
comes
the
back to
skills we
something
need.
that Nick was answering earlier and everything is I can hear your argument and what you're saying about the tech industry and the population of those that are in the tech industry that are Indian American. I could actually also possibly make the same argument on the trade side, on construction, landscaping, and a number of other fields that are heavily populated by the Latin American population. And part of that is coming back to Lee's conversation about personal choice. People are oftentimes not wanting to go into that jobs because those jobs require a lot of workforce and work
Sacrifice.
exertion that they don't want to do and things in
Sacrifice
that
and
space.
sweat.
So sweat, right. There's a lot of sweat equity that folks don't want to do, including on the farm and all in that nature. And they
Man.
are folks that have to do it for survival standpoints and all in that line. So I can make that argument with the Latin community on the trade side.
But whatever the argument is, the point still remains that at the moment, there is too much money in the system. This is just plain economics, right? There's too much money in the system. And the government, whether you agree with what they're spending the money on or not, the government is continuing to spend a whole heap more money. So,
But not their money.
I got two questions
the
about the
markets
money.
have to respond somehow. And
About
the way
spending
the
money, I got two.
let me finish, Mark. The way the markets are responding is that the Federal Reserve is jacking interest rates up, and our long-term investors, like pension funds, are saying, "Hey, we want a higher return on our money." And let's not forget, there's nothing for nothing in the world. Okay, the fact that interest rates are going up and inflation rates potentially are going to come down as a result of interest rates going up, that also helps a group of people that haven't had a really great time for the last 20 years. And that's the older community of people that are on fixed incomes, because those people benefit from higher interest rates, right? Lower volatility, high interest rates. They benefit. So you have to take it from somebody in order to give it to somebody else. What exactly is the solution that you guys have other than leave the free market?
I've got a question. I don't know I
I
got a question. I don't know the answer, but I'd love to hear people that got solutions. Maybe they can tell me and everything.
Yeah,
Because
well,
we'll refer
the
to a show that's
solution
coming
is let the
on
market-
in about 20 or 25 minutes and everything. But
The solution is you just don't want to hear the solution. The solution is let the market sort itself out. This problem, like most problems, was caused by government. The 2007 Great Recession, that was caused by government. The Great Depression, that was caused by government.
Hey, that sounds.
Shaquille and Nick, hold on.
The market sorts itself
Are
out.
there not Shaquille and
That's
Nick,
what the problem
are there
is.
not problems that
Come
have to have a government influence or a government impact in them? We've all kind of glossed over, and all of us are guys here and everything, the whole notion of sexism and microaggression and whether you need those kind of sensitivity trainings or not and things of that space. But we can have a whole conversation about that. That can be a whole nother show and everything. But there is a group of folks that are regularly getting help. And, I work at a nonprofit, and we have to make sure that we are addressing the needs of the disabled. That's where I was going, because Wynn has her show later on. But that is a place where the government has stepped in and doesn't always step in effectively. Is that something that we don't need to be concerned about? Because I think that every place needs to make sure that the disabled or the differently abled are able to access the place. And that is not always the case throughout the U.S. and everything. So is that something that we don't need to have a government concern about?
Sorry, hang on. Before I respond, because
They don't have disabled people.
we were talking about the economy, and my father's in a wheelchair. It's a paraplegic, so don't even start there. Did you just call them differently abled?
No, that's
So
there's
this is
all
the
kinds of
kind of
technology and
This
words
is the
that are
kind
used,
of
and that is what it is.
bullshit that comes out of America, right? As if somebody who can't walk, or who is blind, or who is deaf, like my former partner was, right, is somehow going to say, "Oh, you know what? It's not that I'm disabled and can't walk or I'm handicapped. You know what? I'm just differently able." And it's
Well, I hate to tell you this, Shaquille, but our
Well,
other
always
woman
make
actually
sure
uses
you
that
use
phrase.
the cover
But
up
Wynn
the
Charles
truth.
actually uses that phrase. And she's
Differently
a
I don't
differently
care who
able or disabled
I don't
advocate.
care who
And she
uses
uses
add
the
that
phrase.
to your
It's this
add that to your
woke
vocabulary.
flowery language that's used to obfuscate the truth and make it sound a little bit better than what it really is, so that maybe the person who's in a wheelchair, who can't walk, who can't feed themselves properly or something, they can feel a bit better, as if that's going to make them think, well, you know.
Well, I'll just bring you on the show. You can tell the cerebral palsy person that directly.
But I'll answer your question for you. I am not saying the government shouldn't intervene in some areas. That's why we pay taxes. That's why the majority of people, including the people that actually pay the taxes, the wealthy, agree that taxes should be paid in order to help people who are underprivileged, let's call them, okay, who have different things that stop them from otherwise being able to participate fully in our society. I have no problems with that. But the reality is that when we look at most of the financial calamities that have been caused throughout our history, it has been caused by government, whether it be the Great Depression of 100 years ago or things that have happened more recently, like the Asian currency crisis, the tech boom busting, the Great Recession, or what we're facing right now. This has all been done because of government intervention, and it's been done when one political party or the other, or both of them, fight with each other and ignore the people that know what they're talking about.
So that's a good segue.
Herbert Hoover thought that too.
Governments around the world in the last few years have ignored every economist. They've ignored economists at the United Nations. They've ignored what the bank CEOs have said. They've ignored people that trade and study the markets for a living. They've even ignored the things that were said by board members of the Fed. Now, all of a sudden, they've got a problem and they say, well, what could be the solution?
Hold on a second. I want Steve to shift back. But Lee, I got a quick question for Lee, and it's also going to shift it back to you, Steve. Lee, isn't there something that goes on every April that folks have wanted to get rid of for decades and everything, and some people find ways to avoid it or evade it or whatever, but it's been going on for every April. People panic around it around April. Sometimes they panic later. They got an extension and everything. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we probably need to get rid of that all together, this whole notion of what we do with taxes and the whole balance at the end of the year.
Well, the funny thing is, on this, but we didn't always have this income tax.
We what?
Historically, this is something new. And if you don't pay your taxes, you go to jail.
Right, and that. But I'm saying that do we think that is something that should be going on, or should it not be going on?
On the level that we're doing now, no, it should not be going on now. No,
that's a good segue politically. In terms of like now, what is the country going to do with the new Congress, with Biden with 2 more years?
They want to get rid of the debt limit.
They get rid of it. But I think it's funny. It's sort of funny. It makes me laugh that
funny haha or funny sick.
No, Republicans often say that it's the Democrats. Yes, we're probably throwing too much money in the system now, but
they both do it, Steve.
Let's not forget that the hero of the conservative movement, Ronald Reagan, attributed to a significant amount of our debt, and other presidents following him added to the debt. So this is not a Democrat issue, a Republican issue. It's an American problem. We've been living in Washington for years beyond our means. But the Republicans come in and say, well, the Democrats are wasteful spenders. That's bad on the Democrats for letting that happen. Then Ronald Reagan added more to the debt than any American president in the modern history.
Did you know? Hang on. Well, whoa, hang on just a second. Firstly, did you notice I didn't say Democrats, right? I don't care. And I said governments around the world, which is both sides of the line, firstly. Secondly, Ronald Reagan spent more than any president in modern history. Somebody just tell me how much has Biden spent so far? So far, let me just give you the numbers. Let me give you the numbers, right? You got $4 trillion in tax revenue. He's spending $6.4 trillion. That's in 2021, right? Those are numbers. 30% of the U.S. economy was spent, with only 18% of it coming back in. So the debt amount has skyrocketed under him. Now, prior to him, the debt amount skyrocketed under Donald Trump. And prior to Donald Trump, the debt skyrocketed under Obama. And prior to that, it skyrocketed under Bush. So, yes, it's a Republican and a Democrat issue because both parties don't care. Because if you want to find the only time that you will ever see unity in Washington, D.C. or any other place,
here's the point I was trying to make.
When it comes to spending your money on shit that you don't
and the solution is let's have hearings on Hunter Biden.
What I was trying to say is that in the United States of America, after Ronald Reagan's presidency, that's when the debt began to become significantly worse because It tripled under 8 years of Ronald Reagan, tripled from 738 billion to 2.1 trillion. So after 8 years of President Reagan, our debt in the United States went to the trillion marker. And ever since then, it's been gone off. But for all these Republicans to come in, I'm just saying, this started with a Republican president. It wasn't like that before. It wasn't like that when Jimmy Carter was in the White House. It wasn't like that when President Ford was in the White House. It wasn't like that when President Nixon was in the White House.
Put things
No,
into
I'm giving you actual figures. The debt tripled under Ronald Reagan's presidency.
You are picking and choosing. Nick's already
It's
tried
not
this.
a lie. That's actually from the.
It's the great divide of Reagan.
This is what Nick's already tried on me before. Yes,
So you're
the debt
Republicans
levels.
are wasteful spenders as well. You're wasteful spenders.
Do you have a problem?
Republicans are
You
wasteful
can't handle
spenders
the
as well.
truth.
Now let's just hold up. Let me
I just talked to you a lot. The head of the conservative movement tripled the debt in the United States of America from 738
I'll respond to you. I'll respond to you if you let me.
2.1 trillion in 8 years.
Yeah, I'll respond to you if you let me. So just because your side of politics is a wasteful spender, that doesn't mean that any time the other side spends money that they're wasteful spenders. You want to say that Ronald Reagan was a wasteful spender. What exactly did that increase in debt get for the United States? Did you then go on to one of the most prosperous times in US history? Was the markets pretty good? Was there massive economic growth under Reagan? What about Thatcher? Because Thatcher and him were significant increases in the average quality of life for Americans and Brits during that time when debt levels
You're losing
increased.
this argument. No. You had 4 years of Reagan.
The average
Then you had
person did not do well under Reagan.
You had George H.W. Bush.
Oh,
I
I
love
didn't.
George H.W.
The money went to the 1%.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you're one.
That's all the stats.
You're the one.
Shrunk the
average
working
person
class.
did not
And then a
do
man
well
named Bill
under
Clinton
Reagan.
came in and he said it's the economy, stupid. And he took out George H.W. Bush in the largest landslide. An unknown governor from Arkansas just took out Bush even after he won a war. So goddamn, Reagan actually did Bush a disservice. He handled George Bush a disaster, and Bush was in there for 2 years. Even though he won a war, he lost the presidency to an unknown governor from Arkansas. It was a
You know why that happened?
And then
Because-
Clinton turned America
because
So what?
Clinton pushed
So what?
Bush when
Richard Nixon
he was
beat
50
JFK's successor after JFK was assassinated.
8 years of Bill Clinton, we had the largest economic expansion in the history of the United States. After Bill Clinton, the largest economic expansion.
You're wrong on your numbers. You're wrong on your numbers, and you're also wrong on your politics. I'm not saying that Bill Clinton was a bad. I'm not saying that Bill Clinton was a bad president. I'm not saying that at all. But you've got to take the good and the bad. You want to try and make out. You want to try and deify every Democrat president. Bill Clinton absolutely completely demoralized the U.S. military and the things that went on in Desert Storm and other conflicts in the Middle East. Dan?
No, Reagan did. The investments did probably lead to the end of the Cold War. He had to make some of those investments from defense systems and things like that. So we did win the Cold War. But what did that get us? We got a maniacal dictator in there that's invading Ukraine. So the end of the Cold War, was that really a success?
Putin wasn't in charge back then, Steve. Putin wasn't in charge back then, and let me just say,
I love you. I love you.
Do you want to maybe attribute some of that blame to your great beloved JFK that you were telling us all about the other day, whose issues with the Cuban Missile Crisis still affect the United States today? You want to talk about that, or we're just going to gloss over that bit? Just talk about the debt levels increasing.
That was the art of diplomacy. That was an American success that we negotiated down, and we
So
got
is Marilyn Monroe.
Having a conflict with one of the nations that is closest to you is a success of American diplomacy. Wow!
Shaquille,
maybe you should stick out of American politics.
Shaquille, just to be clear, because you've said it a couple times on other shows as well. Yes, even I can say that the Democrats, and yes, I am a lifelong Democrat, and all of that have not done all that great. And I will say it here, and I'll say it again. I am not the biggest fan of Obama's policies with drone missiles and all of that. So just in case somebody did not know that, definitely I will say that I like some of the things of the president. I also think that the president let down some people when he was president because he had some some people in the graduate community had some thoughts about what he was going to do when he got into office that might have been unrealistic because they thought that he was just going to come in there. And I would say the same about Trump, by the way, Dan, as well, because they thought he was just going to come in here and make these wholesale changes, not realizing what quagmire, because when you go into politics in Washington, you're going into a quagmire, the quagmire that you're stepping into and the whole things that you've got to deal with in order to have the success that you
Now,
need.
I will defend Shaquille.
One of the things you're going to
You're
do,
going to
mate,
defend
now-
Shaquille? Don't bother.
Let me make the final point because I think it can bring us all together in terms of. So yeah, okay. So Shaquille, you brought up a good point, and I do think it's important to look at it. The economy, when Bill Clinton took over the presidency, they lost their economic strategy. And what was that strategy? They created actually 22.7 million jobs, which is the highest on record and the largest economic expansion since actually in probably a century under Bill Clinton. But you know what they did? They eliminated the deficit. They kept interest rates low, and they spurred private sector investment by investment in education, training, science, and research. Now, there were no wars at the time, so we weren't dealing with all these wars and everything.
Well, you
There was
were.
relative
Sorry, you
peace
were.
and stability. So that
You
does
were.
go
You
to
had
Shaquille's
this
argument.
before.
Well, the Democratic policies today are not working. I will agree with that. Now we are spending trillions of dollars, adding on to the deficit. Interest rates are higher. We're in the middle of inflation. So yes. Now the question becomes, what do we do to reset our course back? Now, what will Ron DeSantis? So DeSantis if DeSantis does run for the presidency or Trump, now what I would advise them is that they're going to have to go back to how to get the economy back on track, right? How do we get out of the mess that we're in? I mean, that's how you guys.
I can answer that for you, and it's not to look at Trump or DeSantis or anybody else
Well,
who comes
whoever it
into Republican or Democrat leadership. They're not the solution. The government doesn't solve these issues. Bill Clinton didn't create those jobs. Donald Trump didn't create the jobs. What they did was they changed regulations in order to make sure that they changed regulations, and as a result of those changes, businesses were able to flourish. I know from personal experience when I've tried to set certain things up, and I've considered the United States as being a place to set up holding companies. And by the time I've gotten through all my lawyers and gone, is this something? Let me just ask you the question. Am I legally allowed to do this thing that I'm proposing, yes or no? They can't give me an answer because there's so many rules and regulations that you just can't answer it. So I just look at it and have done many times in my career and gone, you know what? I'm not going to set up a company, a holding company in the United States. I'm just going to go elsewhere. I'll go to Canada. I'll go somewhere else.
Hey,
So
Shaquille.
this is the thing. When people that Mitt Romney and Obama talked about this, and I was in stitches laughing, as were a lot of other people who were watching their debates live, because they were talking about what's going to attract foreign investment into the United States, and they completely missed the points. Your rules, your regulations are too complicated. You know, your tax system is absolutely absurd. Prager University was talking about a thing that they did a handful of years ago where they sent a typical tax return to 46 or 48 different tax preparers. And all 46 of them came up with a different answer as to how much that family owed in taxes. How is the everyday person supposed to navigate a system as complex as this? The problem is government's fault, but government is not the solution. If government gets out of the way and lets people who are productive actually have a chance to do things, we'll solve the issues. People like me will be able to fix things like the renewable energy crisis and all of that. We'll be able to sort it out.
But Shaquille, isn't part of the problem, and I'm gonna bring up something that I think I brought on the show before, but I'm just gonna bring it back full circle, and it even comes back to our favorite conversation, rice and everything. But isn't part of the problem that when programs that are created that are actually workable, they get hijacked? And Lee, you'll enjoy this and everything. But you know, there is a group of folks, I'm not saying that I'm part of this group, but there's a group of folks that are very much militant in the African American community. They are known as Black nationalists. And there's a group of people that were part of that Black nationalism that have a movie almost named after them. Not really, the movie is about the cartoon character, but they're called the Black Panthers and everything. And they actually created a program in California that the government hijacked. Was, in my understanding, Head Start really was that whole food program that was started by the Black Panthers, if you studied the history and everything. And the government was like, hey, great idea. Let's run it and basically run it into the ground and all of that.
I'm not going to give Head Start. I'm not going to give the credit to Black Panthers. I'm sure that you can try and persuade me of that off air. But let me say this. yeah, you're right. If you did have a program that was working well enough, okay, the government's going to come in and take over it. Just like education. Education didn't used to be mandatory in the United States, and the churches that provided education to the people that couldn't afford it were doing a pretty bloody good job. And the kids that didn't want to go and get an education that way went into other things and found trades and all that sort of stuff. Okay, the government comes in, they cause us the problems, then they say, well, we're going to tax other people to pay for our programs that are failing. And what they keep doing is they keep getting in the way and stopping creative, inventive, entrepreneurial people like myself from ever being able to achieve anything. There's a reason I don't live in Australia. I left Australia for exactly the same reasons that I'm being critical of the United States and other advanced Western democracies. The government regulations are too cumbersome. And unless you go somewhere where the regulations specifically cater for what you're trying to do, or you go somewhere where the government's not on your back all the time, it's very, very difficult to achieve anything. And that's what slows down the economy. If government got out of the way, Steve, Republicans and Democrats, if they just got out of the way, the people, the entrepreneurial spirit of America would solve these issues.
I think what I said is important for all of us to agree on. Forget about, this is one of the wonderful things about this show. Forget about being a Republican and Democrat. Let's look at policies. So we know what works to create jobs is lowering the interest rates, encouraging consumer spending, lowering deficits. This is all the things President Clinton did to create the 22.7 million jobs. So I think we have to get back to basics. And my advice to the Republicans would be, let's get back on track. If you guys argue on what you're going to do, whether it's DeSantis or Trump, that person could win re-election. Go back to the basics. The Democrats did it in 92. It's the economy, stupid. Well, you know what?
The government doesn't have any control over interest rates, right? That's the Fed, which is an independent branch. And lowering interest rates in and of itself, doesn't spare.
Yeah, it's true. The Fed is independent.
The government doesn't have any.
Lowering interest rates in and of itself, that doesn't spur economic growth.
Trump set on their head.
There's massive economic growth in the Middle East, and their interest rates are significantly higher all across the Middle East than what it is in the United States. What you need to do is have a business-friendly rules, and also have inflation relatively low compared to your interest rates, and that's fine. Let people flourish. They will.
And Shaquille, I know we're winding down, so I'm going to toss it back to Steve. Just to be clear, so those who were watching and everything, it was actually, and you can actually look it up on that lovely thing called Google and everything. It was actually the school breakfast program is what the Black Panthers started, but they did start a program that did become national. So that is the program that I was thinking of.
They may have started it. They may have started that in California, but the Black Panthers are not the only people in human history that ever thought of the idea of feeding underprivileged children at schools. This is not an American program, just like most things in your Bill of Rights are not American ideas. Okay.
Point taken, but I'm just saying that my whole point was that I was agreeing with you that if we would let communities address these needs, they would probably come up with solutions, which is why I used the Black Panther example.
Mark, what's stopping them?
What's stopping them? A lot of times it's that red tape that Shaquille refers to as well, because despite all that government funding, it is not as easy to get things launched as people think it is. And there's a lot of red tape in the creation of different organizations and the creation of different programs.
I'll give you a more direct answer, Lee. If you go to Walmart, I'll be very quick here because we're about to wrap up.
Okay.
If you go to Walmart or Whole Foods or whatever and ask them to give you the fresh produce that they're about to throw away in order to be able to donate that,
they won't give it to you. I get that.
Food, they won't, but they'll throw it away. Why? Not because they don't want to do it. Not because they don't want to, but currently because of government regulations that prevent them from doing it.
I understand
That's the sort of thing that
there's nothing stopping
gets in the way of progress.
But there's nothing stopping people from going to Walmart, buying food, and giving it out to underprivileged kids.
Yes, that's right. But for an organization, like a charitable organization that's trying to promote a program like that, that's the sort of thing that causes problems. Just like if you try to say to your kids, hey, look, when I was a child, I had a lemonade stand. If you want to earn some extra money, put a lemonade stand. Now, if you live in most, suburban areas, most of the neighbors are going to come over, and even the lemonade's terrible that the kids have made, they're going to give them $1 or whatever, and it's fun for the kids. Okay? True. Then all of a sudden, government's got to get involved, and you start sending police officers out there to find out if they've got a permit and health and safety, their lemonade stand complies with health and safety rules.
No,
This is the
so
sort
real
of stuff that
guys, it's
continually
11 o'clock. We've got to leave. So I'm going to close out today. We're going to thank you. I want to wish everyone, it's the beginning of the holiday season. I'm wearing my Santa hat. I'm going to Santa's workshop tonight. I'm planning Santa's arrival on Christmas Eve. I'll be in Mexico this year, which is exciting. And I just wanted to let you all know that tomorrow we'll be talking a little bit about the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. I attended an event yesterday to talk about the $5 billion that is being invested in electric charging stations. 160 million coming to North Carolina over the next decade, 16 million in year one, 22 million in year two. Now, Shaquille is laughing, but I am a bit of a skeptic, to be honest with you, because my biggest thing is, is the mindset there to buy this many electric vehicles? And is it really worth investing that much money to have these electric charging stations? For me, I did see Shaquille Latimer laughing, but I'm also a bit skeptical about this because I didn't buy an electric car because I didn't want to buy an electric car because it's too hard to find a charging station. Is the mindset also important as we look at getting off of carbon emissions? I got to go. Guys, thank you all so much. And remember, we are here to have these wonderful, respectful, sometimes turbulent, but hearty discussions. Happy holidays to you. Wishing everyone, whether what party they're from, happy holidays. And remember,